This is a John Deere X380 riding mower with a 44-inch front blade and this tow-behind cultivator attachment that I bought. And I am going to try to use it to clear some of the scrubby brush and high grass in this field so I can till up the soil and plant wildflower seeds. I had to buy a bigger hitch pin to attach this thing to the mower because the pin that comes with the cart was too small. You are supposed to buy something called a sleeve hitch attachment to attach this thing to your mower, which allows you to adjust the level and raise it up so you can drag it around on those rear supports without dragging through the soil. However, this thing is light enough that I just picked it up and put it in the cart to move it to where I want to use it, and then put it down on the ground. The sleeve hitch attachment was just as expensive as the cultivator attachment itself, so I didn't want to spend the extra money for that. We're also going to stick the GoPro on here so I can get some footage and you can see how these attachments perform. So here we go, just with the GoPro mounted on the front of the tractor, looking at the plow blade, and here I know I'm not really going to dig up much of the soil. I just wanted to see if I could do anything to scrape away the top level of brush and maybe any of the larger rocks. And you can see as I'm going along, the blade is kind of catching a bunch of the taller dead grass and scraping it out of the way. So since I was doing this earlier in the season and I didn't have the mower deck attached yet, I have some other videos on swapping out the plow blade and the mower deck. I wanted to see what I could do while I still had the plow on there. I should also mention I still had the tire chains on. I don't know if you saw those earlier in the video. As you'll see later in this video, the soil was still pretty wet. We tend to have a kind of swampy section of our backyard, so in April and May, this still gets kind of muddy, and I am going to get stuck in the mud more than one time later in this video, even despite having the tire chains on. However, you can kind of see as I'm going back in the other direction here, I did sort of manage to start clearing a path, so you can see how it's kind of obvious where I just drove relative to the sides, but the plow itself definitely did not just kind of scrape the top layer of soil away. It's not like using a Bobcat or something. The X380 is really not heavy enough to do that, so it's mostly going to ride over the top and just do a little bit of scraping. I'm going to go ahead and accelerate the rest of the footage here so you can just go ahead and kind of watch sped up what the rest of using the plow looked like. And what you'll see here over the course of multiple passes is that I did manage to start getting down to the soil and scraping away a lot of the grass, although to be honest, I think a lot of that work was done not by the plow, but just by the tires and tire chains slipping slightly and starting to dig up the mud. Slowing back down to regular speed, you can see this muddy patch here where, again, you can clearly see the marks from the tire chains, but there's that grassier patch in the middle that was a little less muddy with more established grass that I did not manage to chop up as much. But I definitely have a path started here relative to the higher brush on either side. Next up, we're going to try the cultivator attachment. I'm going to try it without cinder blocks first. The instructions say to add cinder blocks for additional weight, but we're going to see how it does without them. Unfortunately, I forgot to actually start the GoPro for this first run, so we're just looking at the end result here, where you can see I did manage to drag along and scoop up a bunch of mud and grass. And if we then zoom out and kind of look at the path, I can see some rocks I dug up and kind of a couple lines where this thing went through, but really didn't dig up the soil as much as I hoped it would on the first pass. So now we're going to switch over and try it with a cinder block for added weight. So here we are with a GoPro view of the cinder block, and the first thing you'll probably notice here is that it bounces around quite a bit. So the instructions actually suggested using 2 cinder blocks, but I didn't really have enough space on top to fit 2. I guess I could have tried a little harder to cram 2 on there. But at least for what I'm trying to do here, the one isn't really heavy enough to keep it down in the soil. And it will kind of lightly scrape, but then once it also starts accumulating enough muck, which you can't really see off the bottom of the camera here, it really kind of starts just gliding over the surface and not digging in anymore. So I didn't notice that driving from the front. It's much more visible when you're looking at it from the side view, which I'll show in a minute. And I was able to go in a straight line, but again, with the field being super muddy, the moment I tried to turn, I wound up just getting stuck in the muddy patch at the end. So you can see this footage here is just from when I'm stuck going back and forth a bit to try and loosen myself, but I wound up having to get off and unclog the thing and unhitch it so I could get the tractor out of the mud. Here's the side view again with the GoPro, where you can immediately see that I really don't have enough weight towards the back. So again, if I was going to try this again, I would probably need 2 cinder blocks and try to get them back farther, because the whole back end of this thing is just lifting off the ground. So the first couple prongs towards the left edge of your screen there are actually doing a good job. You can see them lifting up big chunks of soil, but the back ones are really just up in the air and not doing anything. So I will again speed up the rest of the footage here, which involves a lot of getting stuck in the mud. But what I ultimately wound up doing, and unfortunately not filming, was three things. Having a neighbor with a heavier tractor come over on a drier day, and I actually walked behind this thing as he drove along slowly so I could push down on the back edges. So rather than trying to get more cinder blocks on there, that allowed me to walk behind and really push down and make sure all of the prongs were making contact with the ground, and to stop periodically to clear out all this clumped up grass and dirt that was accumulating and forcing it up out of the ground. So again, unfortunately didn't get footage of that part, but that is what I found worked much better. It was kind of a two-person job, and although he was riding the tractor, I felt kind of like a serf in the Middle Ages or something, walking behind and pushing the plow. That did actually ultimately work better than it did with me trying to do this alone. So if you want to give this a shot yourself, I guess those are a couple of the recommendations I would make. You either need to pile way more weight on there, or get a bigger tractor that can do a better job pulling it without getting stuck in the mud. Don't try on a super muddy day, and maybe get a friend or a second person to kind of walk behind and help guide the thing and press down on it. Here's a shot I took where I just got totally stuck in the mud, although I will say the nice thing about the X380 being light is that it's light enough that you can actually move it by hand if you get stuck, so you don't really need to get anything else to tow it out. You can just push it or get a 2x4 or something to use as a lever, and you can get it out of a ditch if you need to. Here is a shot of the final product, and again, I did not get footage of the process for this part, but this was after my neighbor came over and I walked behind and pushed down on the cultivator to ensure it would dig up the soil better. And then we did go over everything with a big gas-powered tiller just to chop up the soil a little more finely. So I planted a bunch of wildflower seeds, and I will, I guess, check back in a few weeks or later this summer to see if this actually worked. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts on whether this was a stupid idea, or there are better ways to do it, or attachment recommendations for people with smaller riding mowers like myself and not a bigger garden or utility tractor, please go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you.